Any of the mobile lab? Do we have any questions as yet? Okay. Members of the audience, I reckon. Shall we have one or two questions? Anyone at all? Okay. There you go. From mobile app, we have a question right there, if I may. How do you measure the success of learning from an institution and learning perspective? Okay.
Yes, what I'll do is invite you to participate at any point in this session, because I'd like, as far as possible, to stimulate interactivity, because I know how difficult it is in the keynote not to adopt a transmission mode. So you'll hear me take up that question as I move along, because it's a really crucial question about measurement. And you'll hear me focusing upon qualitative evaluation, rather than a scale of measurement. But I'll certainly deal with that because it's a very important part of what I do, trying to evaluate the success of the learner. But don't hesitate at any point, and you can see in this very large room, I can hardly see the people at the back, but don't hesitate if you are, and I say inspired or stimulated to ask a question that is a concern of yours, please ask it. Because people will come around with microphones, and I often find it's far better to respond to a concern of a member of the audience than it is literally to transmit some of the knowledge that I have. So I hope you will do that. The theme that I've come to talk to you about is in relation to the conference or the symposium, which is Transforming CET. So I'm fascinated by transformation. And also this notion of innovation in workplace practice and learning. So those two things, transformation and innovation. And I'm going to focus, as the title of my talk is saying, and I don't know if the organisers can now bring up on the screen what is actually on my desktop, because there it is. Now, what I'm going to look at is improving practice and the learning and practice in the workplace through living theory research. And what I want to show you is what I understand by living theory, because it's not a term that many of you, I imagine, have used. And what I do is I bring resources from my website into my keynotes that I give around the world. So I want you to be very aware that you've got free access to any of these resources. And what I always do before giving a keynote is actually to put the notes on my web server, and you can access them here just by pressing that. The notes come up, and next week you'll have the video of the presentation plus the PowerPoint slides that Michael Child devised from my notes from my workshop, because I don't tend to use PowerPoint slides. The organisers very much wanted PowerPoint slides, so he produced a set for you, and I'll go through them because I want to make a point about a limitation in using this media. As you can see on side by side, you've got a text, and that text is just giving you information. Now, what I want to show you shortly is how you can use this media as an electronic portal to bring to you what I'm calling living theories, and I'll explain what I think these are in a moment. But in this room, you can now access, through the wireless internet, all of this resource which is flowing to you from the internet. So use this, as I show you, as an electronic portal where the accounts, the stories from educators from around the world who've been creating their living theories are being offered freely to you as gifts to use in whatever way you wish as you generate your own. Now, in Singapore, when I was here at the 25-year celebrations, that was in 1990, I was supervising a Singaporean called Peggy Cox. She's now Peggy Leong. And Peggy came and identified herself as an East Asian woman. And her thesis described being supervised by a white Western male. That was me. Believe me, the differences in values that Peggy addresses in her dissertation, I'll show you how you can access it. It's a lovely dissertation called The Art of an Educational Inquiry. And it's a living theory thesis where Peggy takes the values of excellence in Singapore and explains the tension of meeting the white male supervisor from a Western academy focusing on democracy, freedom and justice. The difference between the economic prosperity of Singapore with excellence, and Peggy struggled to put these two together and does it brilliantly in her dissertation. So I do hope you will access that, because it's nearly 50 years next year, isn't it, to your celebration of the creation of Singapore. And as I say, I was here for the 25th celebration, and I was supervising Peggy, so it's lovely to be back. I'm just wondering whether I can stimulate you to generate your own living theories, and I don't think you'll find it easy. And the reason is that in Singapore, as in China and some of other Asian countries, you value the family, as far as I understand your culture and your values, more than you do self, and you value the nation in the sense of Singapore at a very high level. So the idea that I'm going to put to you, that to have a transformatory continuing education and training, transformatory, which is also innovative, you will need to focus on the kind of questions that the last speaker asked you to respond to in the questionnaire on the internet. And those questions all had, if you like, I in them. I. What I will be doing differently. How can I apply my learning in some way? What specific ideas have I on what I can do differently? The I, which in the Western academy and the Western cultures, is actually something that, if you like, we would take for granted. In my experience in Singapore, in Japan, in Jakarta, and also in China, it doesn't come easily to ask the question, how can I improve what I'm doing? So for you to actually put into what we call the public domain, on the internet, your narratives of your influence in your practice, in your workplace, as part of your continuing educational development, is not something I think many of you have already done. And yet I'm suggesting that developing this transformatory approach to continuing education and training, especially in relation to innovations in learning and practice in the workplace, that each one of you will need that creativity which comes from asking yourselves, how do I improve my practice? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a minute, because in this very large space, it will be necessary for you in the workplace, I believe, to have conversations with at least one other person, where you take an interest in what it is that they're trying to do to make things better. So what I want you to do, and literally, I'll just ask people to take a minute each in a pair, and if there are threes because of odd numbers, just work in threes, just to share something about your workplace that you would like to see improved. Something that you believe in relation to your values could be better. And I want you to actually focus on your own I. What is it that I could do better? What is it that I could contribute to improving practice in the workplace? Have you got that I'd like you just to do? So it's just, as I say, just a minute to share, and then I'll just mention into the microphone I'd like you to switch, because I want a pair to actually have that minute each to say quickly what it is that you believe could be improved, but put the I into it. What can I do? What can I do to make things better? So could you just take that now, please, and just talk together, as I say, just for that minute or so. Okay, could you begin to switch round so the other person gets a chance? Okay, that's the 2 minutes. So if we could just start to come back together. And this is the point that nobody starts to pay attention to the speaker. Because the interest that you have in each other, I don't think you want to stop. Now, that interest that you were just showing, and you are quite an obedient audience, it didn't take long to actually bring you back literally under control. Yet, if you got into that kind of dialogue together, it starts to evoke a passion, a real desire to look at what it is that you want to improve. You want to do better. Now, if you want a transformatory approach to your continuing education and training, one that is focused on improving practice in the workplace, I'm just suggesting that you will need to engage in those conversations. Because believe me, the noise in the room, the intensity of the tables and how you are talking together is what I'm saying you'll need to focus on. Because it's tapping in to what it is you value. What is it? It's not just a matter of doing things differently. It's what would you do to improve your practice? The idea of improvement focuses on values that really matter to you. Now, I'll just go through the slides that Michael Cho produced from my notes for the keynote, because I want to show you something. It was very good, the way in which Michael took out some of the key ideas in relation to what I put in my notes that is already on the web for you to access. But I want to move down to something that I think each one of you actually can do. And that is create your own living theory. Now, this is a kind of explanation which is very different to the kind of explanations which you will get from traditional theory. A traditional theory, like, for example, one of the speakers was using cultural, historical, and activity theory. You have a general set of concepts which you apply to a particular case. This process, I think, every one of you will be familiar with. You use a process of deduction to go through a general principle to the individual case. In a living theory, you generate your own explanation of your influence in your practice. Now, that I'll show you how people have been getting their doctorates, their master's degrees, from examining questions of the kind, how do I improve what I'm doing, but studying their own practice and learning over a minimum for my part-time students of 5 years. And I've put over 32 of my own supervisions on the web, and people have been sending me living theory dissertations from all over the world to show that this approach is being developed in different contexts and different organizations, different industries. But I just want to focus on that idea that you can generate, and it is a valid explanation, of your educational influence both in your own learning, in the learning of others, and I think this will fit with what you're concerned about in terms of Singapore and your organizations when we talk about the social formations in which you live and work. So it's not just a sense of building up a personal anecdote about what it is you're doing. You've got to explain your influence in terms of your own learning and the learning of others, and also the learning of the social formation in which you live and work. Now, that is my understanding of a living theory. And I coined that phrase in the 1980s. I put it in my presidential address to the British Education Research Association to distinguish your explanations and my explanations of my influence in learning from the traditional theories that are being put forward in terms of general concepts, which you'll all be familiar with. Now, that's quite a good use of a PowerPoint that Michael did for me, because it's linked to a communication of an idea. And here's another one, before I go on to show you how I think multimedia can be used in relation to this as an electronic portal, bringing narratives, living theories from all over the world for you to use in whatever way you wish. But what this is doing is to say, look, if you ask the question, well, how do I improve what I'm doing? Now, there's a process which is known as the action reflection cycle that I think all of you will recognise you do in your professional practice. You all can talk about, as you did earlier, what do you want to improve? You can bring your values. Why do you want to improve it? And then develop the action plan. What will you do? And as you're doing that, it's important to gather data so you can make a judgment about your effectiveness. So as you're acting, to make sure you're gathering appropriate data to actually make a judgment about your effectiveness. And this is where I want to briefly mention the question that I got about how do you measure it. And then the crucial thing is to evaluate your effectiveness, and I'll show you where you can access these explanations that individuals have produced to explain their influence in their own learning and the learning of others, and as I said, the learning of the social formation. But at this point, this evaluating your effectiveness, it's rather different to measuring. Some of you who you know your statistics and you know the difference between the non-parametric and the parametric statistics and how these are sometimes abused because sometimes parametric statistics are used when the data is actually what we call nominal or ordinal. If it's nominal, you can't actually create a taxonomy where you know things about the intervals, like a ruler. Because when you get to measure something, you need to know something about the intervals. Like when you're measuring something about a length or something about a weight, you can actually use those kinds of measures. In this kind of research, you use something which is often used in a court of law. You produce an explanation with evidence that puts it beyond reasonable doubt that your explanation is valid. So let me make that point again, that with this notion of the learning, and I can show you how over 2 years, 3 years, often for master's degrees, 5 years minimum, part-time for a doctorate, it becomes very clear in terms of the evidence that the individual is producing about the nature of the learning that is taking place. And not all learning is educational. This is why in the Institute of Adult Learning, I think you may need to focus on the values that you use to constitute, if you like, educational learning. Let me just emphasize that point, because I was born in 1944, when in some European countries, people were learning as a society that some people were not worthy of being actually kept alive. They were being exterminated in gas chambers. Now, if you like, that learning that went on, it was undoubtedly learning, but no way could it be counted as educational learning because it denied the values of humanity that, if you like, I associate with education. So when you're thinking about learning, do try to bring in the values that lead to, if you like, the flourishing of humanity. And the last speaker talked about the dignity and also a fulfilling life. So I think in Singapore, you've really focused on the economic well-being, and I also believe that you want to lead flourishing lives in terms of the values of humanity. So you need to bring those in to your accounts. Now, this is where I think you can access the reports that show you how to do that. Now, this is what Michael did. He produced a slide about facilitating the development of an effective, innovative and responsive CET centre. Now, if you look here, and you look at these as live URLs, this is where I think that, if you like, it changes this portal from using a slide just to communicate to where it's bringing to you the ideas of others from different parts of the world. And this one comes from Ireland. It's a researcher, she's now lecturing at Dublin City University, Yvonne Grotti. And Yvonne has been very influential in developing innovative ways of using multimedia in CET. Now, here is the whole of the thesis that you can access, which is now flowing to you. It's all around you, which you can access using your either mobile devices or your computers with the website. The abstract is there, but here, and this is for all of the theses I'll show you, you can access the contents. So with all of these theses that come into this space that you can now access, which is different from just using this as a media to communicate on PowerPoint, just as I did with What is a Living Theory. You've got an electronic portal that is bringing to you these kinds of accounts from all over the world, these living theories. And this is being accessed at the moment, and this brings you to the other living theory theses and master's dissertations that have come onto the web. So I hope that was not too quick for you, because if you go into my webpage, which is actionresearch.net, you can access all of these. You can, from here, this one, you go into the living theory theses and master's dissertations, and just look at the range. This is the latest one that came out of South Africa, the University of Pretoria, and it's all about a living theory of teaching undergraduate medical students. Look at the titles. Bonnie Kaplan, again, South Africa, different university, Durban University of Technology. How do I use my living and lived experience to influence creative economic independence in others? And again, this is a very powerful dissertation which focuses on something which I think everybody here would like to do, which is to support the creative economic independence, literally, in others. And this was a South African context, and it was working with rather poor black individuals to help to create an economic independence in relation to this area around Durban. Now, if you look at just some of the other titles, and as I say, freely available, come to you through the internet. These at the moment are in the room, they're flowing around you, that you can access. But some of the titles here, this is from Tasmania. It was accredited from the University of Western Sydney. And I want to emphasise that these living theories, grounded in the I questions, have been now legitimated and given credibility with universities in different parts of the world. And I've just shown you University of Pretoria, Durban, University of Western Sydney. Most of my supervisions were with the University of Bath. I've now got a couple starting at the University of Cumbria. But do you get this idea? And I do hope you are. How am I generating a living theory of environmental activism with inclusionality? So it's that question, how am I generating? Which I don't think many of you, as I say, have made the focus of your research or continuing educational development and training. So I'm hoping that these would interest you. This one here, Mark Potts, 2012, how can I reconceptualize international educational partnerships as a form of living citizenship? And I think many people in Singapore are really committed to developing these educational partnerships with different industries, which again, Mark has actually shown with his thesis. This was from Israel. This was McGill University in Canada. Queensland University of Technology. This one would interest, and when you think of the range of industries and commerces represented in this room, you know, I wasn't at 149 or so on my own program of delegates from different industries in Singapore. It's a huge number of different professional contexts. And this one here of Graham Van Tool, Graham was an engineer, he's an engineer, working in the petrochemical industry, and his inquiry was, how did he move from an engineer to a co-creative catalyst? And it was actually about improving the profitability of a petroleum company, but actually taking into account the values that Graham holds, not only the economic values, but also in terms of human relationships. But you'll notice the number of people that have actually been able to put the eye into the question, which I doubt in terms of many of the universities you are associated with, they will be familiar with actually accrediting the embodied knowledge of a practitioner in their continuing professional development over time to actually gain their master's and their doctoral degrees. And many of the people, for example, in Canada, didn't actually registered for accredited programs, they undertook these kinds of inquiries, rather like the MOOCs. There is some form of accreditation there, but actually it's actually to undertake the professional development in this way, using the action reflection and also creating their own living theories. Now, I hope that's clear, because what I want to do in the last few minutes is to focus on, and if there are questions, as I say, don't hesitate, and somebody will come around with a microphone and just interrupt me because I can't see you at the back. I just want to show you something that, for me, has been very powerful in terms of my own continuing professional development. And it's to do with the use of multimedia. In 2004, I was a part of a 5-person committee on the Senate of the University of Bath to review the regulations governing the submission of research degrees. And we managed to bring in a new recommendation, which was to do with the inclusion of e-media into research degrees. So until 2004, the regulations were all in terms of print-based communications. 80,000 words, 100,000 words, all print. Sometimes photographs would be permitted, but no, if you like, e-media in terms of video embedded within the thesis, which actually was part of the thesis. Now, in 2004, we managed to get the regulations changed, so that since then, quite a number of my students have been able to present multimedia, we've got multimodal narratives, including this kind of data. And I hope you'll have the courage to videotape yourselves in your practice, because it may show you that things you believed you were doing, you're not doing. My first experience was in 1972, 1973. The inspectors of schools gave me a camera, there were only about 3 in the area, to experiment with. I turned it on myself, and I got a great shock. I thought I got inquiry and learning going in my classrooms. I was a head of the science department, and I really believed in inquiry and learning. The students asking questions which I responded to. The videotape showed that I was giving my students every question. I was doing it subtly, it wasn't very overt, but nevertheless not one student was actually asking their own question. The video helped me to see that I was a living contradiction. That I believed certain things, but I was not doing them. And my imagination immediately started to work in the action reflection cycle, and within 8 weeks I could bring the evidence using video that my students were asking some of their own questions and I was making a response. Now, the other thing I would urge you to do is to recognize that text on its own can't communicate some of the values and the passions that you hope and that motivate you, because there's a lot of being talk about motivation. Even as I'm speaking to you, I hope you sense that even being present with you is evoking an energy in me that is a passion for what I do, because this is my work, this is what I do. To explain my influence, you will need to bring in this passion and the values base with which you actually live your values in your practice. And I just want to show you how we use video. We embed this kind of video within our text, because this is me in action with a PhD supervision. And if you like, what it allows you to do as digitalized media is this, that you can take an hour's video or however long, and it's the way you can move the cursor very quickly along. Now, I just want to show you this, that this was at the end of a 5-day supervision session with one of the doctoral students who was a superintendent of schools, a very large district, school district board in Canada, called Jacqueline DeLong. And after the 5 days, she was with me, and I'll just show you that something happened which, if you don't bring it into your accounts about explaining why you're doing certain things, and the passion, often the humour, you'll be missing something very important. And this came at the end of 5 days, when I had to say at the beginning to Jackie, she brought me her abstract, thinking it was finished with a doctorate, I had to say that it really wasn't, if you like, good enough to submit. After 5 days, I thought she'd just transformed the abstract, and we're talking about it. And this is, if you like, when you get this, can you see, I don't know if you can see that in the back, but I'll just play it.
Yesterday it was wisdom from Jack. It's excellent. You're going to use wisdom with me,
Now, without the video, if you look at that, in terms of the relationship between student and supervisor, what Jackie does, she hears me on the phone the day before, talking to another PhD student about his wisdom. He'd actually got his doctorate, and I was really praising him, and I just felt that the idea of a doctor of philosophy loving wisdom, and I'd use wisdom. Jackie heard me, and whilst I said that her abstract was excellent, I hadn't used the words wisdom. And she just says, "You're not going to use wisdom with me, are you, Jack?" And I just respond immediately, "No." Now, the humour there, because it is humour, liberates that energy and a passion that you can see we're expressing together. To explain my influence, I'm saying you will need to bring in this kind of evidence, which you can easily embed within your accounts. Now, without that, you wouldn't get a sense there. I mean, it's so spontaneous, the real delight and the pleasure, which I imagine that each one of you experience in your own practice. Now, I'm going to pause there because I've just got a few minutes left, literally a couple. And I'm just going to ask if there are any more questions, from that one at the beginning that you'd like to ask. Because we do have a minute left for questions. Is there anything that anybody wants to ask in terms of what I've been saying? Because I do think what I imagine, the idea of that, the eye, putting the eye in terms of your question, building up your narratives, sharing them, is something that would be transformative for you. But it won't be easy in relation to the culture in terms of your Singaporean history. Is there anything or not? Are we okay?
Professor, just want to say, instead of a question, a thank you for correcting my short-sightedness and providing us with the binoculars, the telescope, and the microscope on CT in Singapore. Thank you.
I've shocked you into silence. There's just one more.
Okay, the microphone's coming up shortly, madame.
Helen from IAD. I was wondering about the process of thinking about and reflecting on and how you might improve your practice and the need for heuristics. Do you find that you use a range of heuristics in facilitating the process? Different ones perhaps for different...
Very much so. The idea of heuristic inquiry is right at the heart of how do you respond to your question, how do I improve what I'm doing? The creativity that's involved, the values that you're not living as fully as you can stimulate you. Now, we also bring in insights from different theories. And I'll just quickly mention one which is very powerful. It's part of our heuristic, grounded in the work of the critical theorist Jürgen Habermas, who says, look, you do need to deepen the validity of the accounts. And I'll just mention this. He says, look, ask a validation group how to improve the comprehensibility of what you're writing. Make sure you've got sufficient evidence to back up the claims you're making. Deepen your awareness of the socio-historical and cultural context in which the practice is taking place. And that means in Singapore you've got a fantastic history of developing a multicultural society. Bring that into your account. And the fourth one is about authenticity, to make sure over time and interaction your accounts show that you truly believe in the values you claim to hold. Now those are all brought into the heuristic of the inquiries. And there are many more you'll see in those theses from that living theory section. which really are full of unique and irreplaceable insights from different kinds of theories that people have used as part of their own heuristic. And don't hesitate to, as I say, connect with me, because my email is on the web page, and we have got communities around the world that would be interested in responding to your accounts if you decided to develop your own living theory. And we've got the Journal of Living Educational Theories, which have got many accounts in there that I do hope you'll access. But I think I've come to the end of the session.
Indeed you have, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Whitehead. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your